No Exit with Nicholas Correes contains explicit language and content. Listener discretion is advised. January 16th, 1952. To whomever finds this. Know now, I write these words on notebook paper, shivering next to a radiator inside a cheap hotel. And what you are reading indeed are my last words and testament as to what transpired between me and my friend, Biff McCoy, on a cold January night in an abandoned farmhouse during a snowstorm. Biff and I had been on the highway for little over a week now. We left our hometown with what was left of our GI bonuses and decided to make the trek all the way from the east to San Francisco, where we would be with our friend of ours until the spring had come. We had apprehensions about leaving due to the fact of it being winter, but we chanced it anyway, not wanting to spend another moment in our old hometown. On our third night, we were caught in a winter storm, ice and snow blasting every inch of our ass cracks. At this time, the region had already been experiencing most unusually cold fall, and frost was everywhere. At some point, Biff thought he could have outrun it in the car, or at least gotten far enough to where we could reach a hotel in Toluca, but it came to no such luck. At a certain point, when the visibility was starting to show the first signs of whiteout, I suggested to Biff that we should stop at the first place we could find and ask to hang our coats up, so to speak. Biff thought this was the only viable option, other than freeze our asses together in the old car, so we did just that. And as luck would have it, or rather lack of luck as we would find out later, we found a place in the midst of a frozen field which we pulled into. It was a ramshackle old farmhouse of a home. Looked like it hadn't seen an ounce of attention since the summer. Reminded me of my grandfather's country home in Sussex, where he and Nana lived till she came down with the cough. That following year, he went mad from a bout of syphilis he caught from a whorehouse. Nonetheless, it was a shelter, and as any place it was. But there was a curious look about it. Couldn't quite put my finger on it at the time. Biff also sensed it, and I could tell in his apprehension. "What do you think?" I asked. He just shrugged and said, "I think there's no one home. Guess that could be all the more better. Come on," he said. We buttoned our coats up and made our way to the front of the house. "Go on, knock on the door," he told me. I gave a few sharp raps on the door and heard nothing. I zipped my coat and tried again, but still no answer. "Just open it, shithead. There ain't anybody here," Biff said. Fortunately, the door was unlocked and we went inside. The house looked unordinary, honestly. Nothing particularly stood out except for the fact that it looked a little dirty and unkempt, but not in a way that presented these people, whoever they were, as slobs or miscreants, but more so that the house had been untouched for quite some time. There was simple furniture, 2 padded chairs by the fire, floral decor, and even a newspaper lying about. It was all very simple, but I just couldn't shrug the feeling I had as I looked around me. "It doesn't seem right," I said. "You'd figure if they moved or something, they would have taken all their things with them. I don't know." Biff was noticeably uncomfortable as I point this out, though I know he wasn't going to say it. Well, we'll take a look around. It's just the house, isn't it? We only need to be here until the storm lets up. Come on." We prodded through the house a little more, carefully, step by step on the creaky wooden floor. It began to look as if an older couple lived here. I saw a portrait in the hall, a mother and a father, straight out of the American Gothic painting itself. Further down the line of pictures, I saw 2 children of teen-aged, perhaps maybe even a bit older. And further down, I saw the aunts, uncles, and cousins, everyone in between. In one particular photo, I saw the house itself in the background. Everything seemed simple enough. These pictures told the story of a real square-jawed type of folk, types that were serious enough about themselves. Church and hay looked to be the meat and drink of these people's existence, which I suppose was fine enough in its own right. But as I looked around, it still begged the question, where exactly were these people? Little did I know I was about to find my answer when I saw Biff outside of a bedroom door he had just opened with a pale look on his face. "What is it?" I asked. He just looked at me and pointed. I went over to where he stood and looked inside. I saw an old man laying on a bed, unmoving. I glanced back to Biff and went inside. It was cold in this room. Cold all over the house, really, but what I saw was an old man who appeared to be frosted over, and this I saw covered in a thin layer of ice all over him. His eyes were blank and carried a horrified stare in his eyes, but the worst part, worse yet I should say, was that he carried a significant wound in his skull. It looked like a bruise, but it had a sticky, frosted up hole inside his skull. I nearly vomited at the sight of it. Biff was leaned over me, inspecting, just as I was, almost using me as cover. I said to him in a whisper, "What is this? Murder?" "How the hell should I know?" he said to me with a dry mouth. Whatever it looks like, he's not going to be going anywhere anytime soon. Let's get out of here. He stood up and composed himself, wiping the sweat off of his face. We're going to wait by that fire, and we're going to turn sleeping. We won't go anywhere else unless we need to. And the second that storm lets up, we're going to get out of here and look for the local sheriff. I shook my head and said yes, though, however, what I really wanted to say was, but when is this storm going to let up, Biff? I held my tongue. It would have helped in the moment. Later, after we had shut the door in the room and made a fire, I'd found some cans of potted meat and various pickled vegetables in the kitchen. I was hungry as all the dickens and ate with the ferocity of a starving dog while Biff stayed in the rocking chair and took long, hard drinks out of the bottle we had brought from the car. I had offered him some of what I found in the kitchen, and he gave me a look of disgust, like he couldn't believe I could feast on dead people's food at a time like this. And I must admit, even though I was hungry, it did indeed feel a bit like grave robbing. Searching for something to get my mind off the current situation, I looked around for something to distract me and reached for one of the newspapers by my side. I flipped it open and noticed a headline right away. It said, "Meteor lands on local farm. Family proud of curiosity." And the thing read just like it said. A real space meteorite had landed, and of all places on this very farmland where we stood, shivering in front of the fire. And I recognized the man in the picture, smiling down in his smoldered, ubiquitous rock in front of him, and the woman next to him. It was that old man and his wife, the same ones in the picture in the hall, smiling big for the camera. The same old man who lay frozen in the bed in the room next to us. I went through the stack of papers next to me, and they were all the same. A whole month's worth of papers from earlier in the year were here, all with the same story, about the same curious meteorite. I leaned over to Biff and showed him what I was looking at. I had broken down to him what I read. Biff wasn't a strong reader after all. Midway through me reading the first article, he snatched the paper from my hand and gave me a very upset look. I've never seen Biff so worked up in my life, and he and I had spent time in the war with Germans shooting at us in a gutter. I got angry with him because of this. "What's the matter?" I said. "This could have something to do with whatever happened here." His nostrils flared up and he gave me a maddened look. "I don't care what happened here, and I damn sure don't need you putting on your goddamn detective hat right now to try and solve it. Give me that." He snatched the paper from my hand and threw it in the fire. I must admit he frightened me, but I was also upset at him. He took a drink from the bottle and shoved it into my chest, and seated himself back in the creaky old rocking chair. "Take a drink of that and shut up. Don't touch nothing else and just sit there. In the morning we're leaving. I don't care if the snow is up past God's ass, we're gonna make it through the night, and I don't need no bullshit for today, thank you." Then I swear to you, as Biff finished his soliloquy here, we heard a sound from down the hall. A creaking step by step on the wood, it sounded like. And when whatever wretched creature was about to peek its head from the corner, it stopped before it looked out at us. But then we saw it. A girl, no older than us, maybe even a little younger. Black hair, brightest of the blue eyes, and what befell her brow was something most disturbing and disgusting. A patch of her own scalp was busted and bleeding, and the blood trickled out of her head. Inside it looked like a writhing mass of rotten meat was spewing from a very brain center. I'd never seen anything like it, not even in my time in the war. I turned blue looking at her, and Biff himself was scared stiff, half out of his chair with the bottle in his hand. The girl moved her frozen blue lips, trying to form broken words from her mouth. Her voice clattered out from chattering teeth. The house, it's getting warm again, and the hearth fire, you're gonna wake them up." "What do you mean?" said Biff. "What do you mean, wake them up?" The girl held her bleeding head and backed away from us as she spoke, as if resisting the heat from the fire. "They took the farm. They took my family and the star creatures. They fell from into the farmland. You can't stay here. They'll wake. They'll take you too." I could tell that the frost from her head was starting to thaw, and I swear to you I could see this. Spidery legs issued from her brain matter and flexed their own appendages. I pointed to Biff, and he was now up, gripping a fireplace poker in his hand. He tried shouting more questions at her, but she began to fade into her consciousness, and finally her eyes drifted back in her head, and she fell to the floor like a bag of bones. Biff and I edged closer to get a better look. The spidery fingers inside her skull flexed about for a moment, and then slowly descended back in. Then the girl's body started to convulse. On her own face, and without the use of her arms, the girl wiggled her way towards the fire. I shouted to Biff to do something, and he swore at me. The girl's body reached for the hearth fire, and she just lay there for a moment, though I remind you that she was unconscious and not breathing. Then, before I had a moment's chance to swear back at Biff, the body slowly began to rise from her knees, and yet still retained a slumped position of lifelessness. The body swayed on its feet and opened its mouth wide enough to break the jaws it gaped. From the roof of her own mouth, more spidery tendrils crept out, a writhing, horrid mass of otherworldly biology most profane to this planet. I screamed and took the fireplace poker straight from the hands of Biff and gave the dead girl a hard wallop to the face. She flopped away to the floor and was out cold, and Biff and I hovered over her, looking for signs of life. When we saw the spidery legs still issuing from her cranium, we screamed once more. "The fire!" Biff said. "Throw her in the fire!" God help us, we did just that. Picking her up by her arms, we tossed her head first into the hearth fire, making sure not to touch any part of her head or face. And wouldn't you know what happened next? Was that damned thing inside her skull wrestled its way out of her into the flames and jumped from the fire itself. It issued an angry hiss from its steaming carapace, and it occurred to me that the creature was more crab than spider-like. It had a pallet of hard, spindly legs on one end and soft, tentacle-like appendages on the other side of it. In the center were a cluster of beaded eyes on stalks that flung every which way, but the worst, I tell you, was the speed of this thing as it pranced about the room, with its charred exoskeleton spreading ash and flame everywhere as it jumped to and fro. "Get it!" I shouted to Biff, "but don't touch it!" Biff grabbed the chair by its back legs and smashed all around the room like a madman, destroying everything in his path, and I swung out into pure air with the finesse of a buffoon. Then, this alien thing had the audacity to land itself on the only place where it knew it would have been safest in the moment, slapped right on top of my very own face like cheese on toast. Biff had been poised back with the chair for a straight shot to my kisser when I shouted for him to stop, and only but barely did he. I could feel the thing burrow into my very bone, I did, but the feeling would have felt nothing compared to a hefty strike from Biff McCoy from a wooden chair. I reached for the thing on my face and attempted to pull it off, but its grip only became tighter. Next thing I knew, I had fallen back and Biff's mammoth hand was under my neckline. I could feel the cold metal in between my face and the thing, and it stirred ever so furiously on my flesh, planting its barbs every which way in me. It would have only been just a moment before this thing would have indeed penetrated my very brain matter when Biff, at the behest of my own physical well-being, successfully pried the offending intruder off my face and held its horrid wiggling presence in his hand. "Ha!" he shouted, then realized the thing had clung to his hand and would not let go. Pain throbbing in my head still, I helped grasp the clinging creature from his hand and we managed to get it down on the floor, where we each took turns stomping it with our boots until the thing itself was a mishmash of dried green and blackened goo with various calcified remains. Ugh, and the smell. "Are you all right?" he asked, and he looked me over in a skeptical fashion. I shouted at him, "Did you have to choke me while you did that? Was that necessary?" He just shrugged. "I had to make sure your head wasn't moving." I shook my head. "Fuck this storm, man. We gotta get out of here. Get everything you can. Maybe we can start that old man's truck up." Collecting everything we could from the fire, we headed for the front door. Sure enough, we weren't 5 feet from that front door when the same old man came from the darkness of the adjoining nook and stood before us. He, too, looked just like the girl, pale, bloodied in the head regions, and stood with a sway in his gait. His blank eyes looked at us with the shadow of a grin and spoke to us in a ubiquitous old alien tone. The hell if I could make out what he was saying, though. Biff and I backed away, yet could hear the shuffling of feet all around us. Those damn things had woken up and gotten everywhere. 5 of them, from what I could count. It wasn't just the family in the picture, but a few more as well. And from what I could tell, it must have been local neighbors, farm people, all stored up through various nooks in this home. I tried to kick the old monster in front of us in its withered stomach and somehow managed to catch my foot and push me away. Imagine the audacity of this. A thing that couldn't manage to stand on its own 2 feet with reflexes like that. I tried to free myself and he pushed me away. Biff quickly put another chair in his hands, ushering him away like a lion tamer. These people with their pale, horrid looks and the spidery tendrils from their heads surrounded us step by step. It looked like we were done for when I happened upon an idea. I grabbed a clock shaped like a rooster from the wall and cracked the immediate window next to me, letting in the bitter, cold air. The creatures in human skin groaned in a most displeasurable way, for they knew what this cold would do to them. While their focus was trained on me, I fought them back and ushered Biff to do the same. He took that chair in his hand and proceeded to smash every near window in sight. The cold blasted inside, and not a moment too soon as the creatures were but right in my personal space, ready to claw my flesh open with their naked hands when the cumulative cold stopped them slowly but surely. I used a moment to catch my breath, then prodded at one of them, frozen monsters, with my forefinger to see if it would react, then slipped out from the semicircle they had gathered around me. "How did you think to do that?" Biff asked. "The warmth, that's what woke them up. The girl herself told us," I said. "These things are sensitive to temperature. If it gotten any warmer in here, then it'd been a lot faster. We'd have been dead 9 times over." Biff shook his head. "What are these things?" "I don't know. I don't think anyone on Earth knows," I said, "but I'm sure there's a reason for them." "Devil in hell, you say," Biff said. "I can't think of any reason in God's existence that something like this should be real." "Maybe it's not part of God's existence, Biff. Maybe that's the problem," I said, and Biff eyeballed me. "We need to get out of here," I said. "First things first," he said, and found the fireplace poker from the floor. Biff proceeded to bash in the head of every frozen spider-haired body in the room, with bits of disgusting ice spraying through the air. When the last bit of it was thrashed to the ground, Biff collected his breath and found his coat. I found mine, and we left, with never an intention to return here. "We'll double back to that small town over yonder, the one where we got gas at," Biff said from behind the wheel. "I can make it through the ice and wind as long as the snow lets up. We'll find somewhere to stay, and the first chance we get, we'll tell the police, maybe even the local military." I sat in the passenger seat, shivering. I felt cold all over, and a sickness ran through my body. I had thought for a second that I had caught a chill from all this cold and rubbed my hands against the car heater. Biff hated it when I put it all the way up, but it was entirely necessary by this point. I found a center of anger in me thinking about what he had just said and shook my head. I told him, "Why bother? You think anyone will believe us? A couple of tramps from the east talking nonsense about space monsters and skull crabs?" This seemed to upset Biff, but I could see he knew I was right. He groaned. "I'll come back to that very farm and smash that godforsaken meteorite with a damned pickaxe if I have to." After he said this, he could sense the frustration in me as I trembled in the cold car. During the rest of that card ride in the freezing storm, we hardly spoke a word to each other. But as it were, Biff had been right. Within 2 to 3 hours of steady driving in the snow and wind, we had successfully managed to find a hotel. Biff and I counted every last scrap of change we had in the car to pay for it. We went straight inside. The first thing I noticed was that there was a radiator inside the room. I sat myself in front of it, haven't moved from this spot since then. I was loath to tell Biff from the get-go, but there was a rather deep indentation where that damnable bug had bit me in my temple, and I had itched it every chance I got. It had been several hours since that incident. Biff was now fully asleep, wrapped up in the covers with an empty bottle in his hand. As of now, I can feel the stirring in my own brain from the bite. I know in my heart what is afoot for me. That awful, horrid bug had put something in me, and I could feel it procreating in my own brain mass now as I write this. As I stay here now, I have a powerful decision to make. Let the bug matter consume me, or walk out into the cold. It's getting later, and the storm is getting worse. Out from the corner of my eye, I watch Biff sleep in his restful slumber, thinking bad thoughts about what could happen to him. Though now, I am unsure if those thoughts are my own, or the thoughts of something else. All I know by this point is that it's getting harder and harder to want to move away from the heat. And I don't know what'll happen if I try. You have been listening to Hell Frosted Over, written and performed by myself, Nicholas Clarice. Background ambience provided by Tabletop Audio. Support them at tabletopaudio.com. End music provided by bensound.com. Follow me on Instagram at NicholasNoExit. You have been listening to No Exit with Nicholas Clarice.